Slack message blinked 3 times. I almost didn't click it. It came from Amy, my director. Subjectless. Just let's touch base at 2 p.m. Bring your updated metrics. No emoji, no sign-off. No warm-up like hope your morning's going okay or quick sync. Just that sentence, direct, cold, and I knew. I don't remember finishing my lunch. I just remember the feeling of something slipping like the floor had tilted a few degrees and only I noticed. My name is David Kent. I'm 42. At the time, I was senior product manager at a mid-sized tech company based in Austin. Nothing sexy, just real work. We handled infrastructure tools for HR departments, back-end stuff, not the kind of product you put on a billboard. But it worked. We worked. I'd been there for 11 years. Not many people in this field can say that. When I started, we were in a rented space above a Thai restaurant, sweating through summer outages and praying Series A would come through before the server crashed again. I was employee number 14. By the time that Slack message came in, we had 4 floors, catered lunches, kombucha on tap, and a rotating cast of culture consultants doing trust-building exercises in the break room. But I'd stayed the same. Show up early. Answer questions no one wanted to touch. Fix problems when they were still whispers and leave quietly. I wasn't flashy, never wanted to be. I wore button-downs from Target. My laptop was always a model behind the engineers. But I knew the product better than anyone. I knew the people. I knew when someone's eyes flickered because a deadline felt fake. I knew when silence meant burnout, not laziness. I wasn't a visionary. I was a builder. The day that message came in, Amanda, my wife, was in the next room helping our son Caleb sound out his spelling words. FROG, he shouted. She clapped. I smiled at the sound. Then I read the message again. 2 p.m. Updated metrics. It might as well have said pack up. At 1:57, I clicked the Zoom link. Amy was there. So was Janelle from HR. Amy didn't turn on her camera. Janelle smiled too much. It took less than 7 minutes. They used all the words: realignment, strategic focus, leadership, evolution. And then Amy said it: we just don't see you as leadership material. No pause, no apology. Just like that, a decade dissolved. They offered a 3-month severance, access to the alumni network, a free resume refresh. I nodded. I didn't say much. I didn't ask questions. I'd been raised not to argue with closed doors. I said thank you, logged off, closed the laptop, sat there staring at the fingerprint smudge on the screen like it might explain something. Amanda walked in a few minutes later. She didn't ask what happened, just looked at me for a long time, then walked over and rested her hand on my back. That's one of the things I remember most. Her hand. Not saying a word. Just grounding me. The next few days were a kind of quiet that doesn't make noise but leaves marks. I still woke up early. Still made coffee. Still checked Slack, half out of habit, half out of denial. Of course, my access had been revoked. The workspace read contact admin for permissions. I didn't. Instead, I sat at our kitchen island, the same spot I'd used to review pull requests, draft JIRA tickets, answer 10 p.m. emails, and just stared out the window. It rained that week. The kind of steady, polite rain that doesn't flood but doesn't stop either. It matched the silence. Amanda suggested we go for walks. I did. We walked around the block. I noticed things I hadn't in years. The old woman with the beagle who always carried a tennis ball in her left coat pocket. The teenager who practiced skateboard tricks at the corner, always landing hard but trying again. The little free library someone built out of a recycled birdhouse. Life kept going. I didn't talk to anyone from work. No one reached out either. I wasn't surprised. That's the thing no one says about being let go. It isn't just the title that disappears. It's the invites, the Slack channels, the inside jokes. You become a ghost in a space you helped build. I didn't feel anger, not at first, just confusion. Grief, maybe. Like losing a house in a fire, only the fire was a sentence spoken by someone who once clapped when you presented a roadmap. I started organizing files, not for revenge, just for understanding. I printed Slack threads, saved emails, exported meeting agendas. I started to see a pattern not in what they said, but in what they stopped saying. Projects reassigned. My name left off notes, questions left unanswered. A slow erosion, polite and precise. They'd planned it. I kept it to myself. Amanda asked gently if I wanted to talk to someone. I said no, not yet. I didn't need therapy, I needed clarity. I reached out to a few old colleagues, not for favors, just to reconnect. One of them, Eric, had left 2 years prior to start his own firm. He said they were looking for someone to help design a tool for remote team metrics, something clean, modular, scalable. I said I'd take a look. It felt strange at first doing work without a title, without a Slack status, without a team. But it also felt good. I worked from the garage sometimes. Amanda brought me coffee. Caleb would poke his head in and ask what I was building. I told him something small but strong. It took 3 months before I realized I hadn't thought about Amy in weeks. And that meant something. Eric's project grew faster than either of us expected. It started with 3 clients, then 7, then 15, mostly mid-sized companies, the kind that used to get ignored by the big platforms. We weren't building the next unicorn. We were building something that worked. Clean dashboards, real feedback loops, no bloat. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building for people again, not for board slides. And Eric, he didn't care about vision decks or whether I wore the right shirt to the call. He cared about 2 things. Does it work? Can you explain it clearly? And I could. Every day I added something, a toggle, a flag, a visualization. I'd send it over, he'd test it. No meetings, no alignment calls, no layers of abstraction, just build, improve, move. I started sleeping better. One morning, Amanda handed me a coffee and said, "You look taller lately." I laughed, but I knew what she meant. I wasn't shrinking anymore. There was no office politics in that garage, just dust and light and work. Caleb sat with me sometimes, asking questions I didn't expect. What happens when the numbers go red? What if the boss is wrong? Do you ever miss your old friends? I didn't lie. I told him sometimes I did, but that I didn't miss feeling erased, and I didn't. Around that time, I opened my old work laptop. I hadn't touched it since January. It still had the last presentation. I'd made a roadmap for Q1 deliverables, complete with risk mitigation and resource mapping. I remembered staying up late to finish it. I remembered rehearsing that presentation. I remembered the silence that followed it, and how no one asked a single question. I deleted the file. A few weeks later, Eric asked if I'd lead a demo call with a potential enterprise client. Said they were evaluating analytics partners and wanted a walkthrough. He sent me the Zoom link. I clicked it 5 minutes early as usual. Camera on, slides ready, calm voice, And then I saw the logo in the top right corner of their slide deck. It was my old company. My stomach tightened, but I didn't show it. They introduced themselves. I nodded, smiled once or twice. They didn't recognize my name or pretended not to. Half the team was new, except for one face. Nate. He joined late, muted, camera off, but I saw the name. Same kid who had been just observing my client calls 9 months ago. The one they promoted behind closed doors. He didn't say a word during the demo. I walked them through the features, showed them the dashboard, the customization options, the latency metrics. They nodded, asked questions, took notes. At the end, their director said, "This is exactly what we've been missing." I ended the call, closed the tab, and sat still for a full minute. Then I emailed Eric and said, "If they move forward, I want the contract structured on my terms." He didn't ask why, just said, "Of course." 3 days later, I got the official inquiry. My old company wanted a short-term consulting agreement to help transition their team onto the platform. They wanted me, the man who wasn't leadership material. I didn't mention the past, didn't send any poetic messages, just replied with a PDF, my rate, my hours, my scope. No internal meetings, no late-night support, no availability on Fridays. They accepted. For the next 6 weeks, I worked with them quietly, efficiently. They emailed questions, I answered. They sent requests, I evaluated. I didn't go to the office, I didn't join their Slack. Nate sent one message. "Thanks for the help. We're learning a lot," I replied. "Glad it's useful, nothing more." And when the contract ended, I sent a final invoice, closed the account, and walked away. No burned bridges, no score settled, no dramatic send-off, just closure. Amanda and I went out for dinner that night. Caleb stayed with my sister. We ordered wine we couldn't pronounce and laughed harder than we had in months. She looked at me and said, "You're different now," I said. "So are they." She smiled. "But they still don't get it, do they?" I shook my head. "No. And they don't have to. Because the point was never about proving them wrong. It was about no longer needing to." After the contract ended, I deleted their contact from my phone. Not out of bitterness, just to clear the space. Eric offered a more permanent position with equity. I said yes, but with boundaries. No titles, no leadership track, no annual reviews designed to confuse more than clarify. Just the work and the people who cared about doing it well. He agreed. That was the start of something new, not a second act, not a comeback, just a different shape of living. I stopped chasing promotions and started investing in clarity. I learned how to say no without guilt. I stopped measuring my worth in ping notifications or calendar invites, and I began every day with a question I never used to ask. Does this feel honest? Sometimes I missed the rituals of corporate life, the rhythm, the office noise, the accidental hallway conversations that solved more problems than most meetings. But I didn't miss the careful performance of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I didn't miss watching talented people get slowly erased just because someone higher up felt threatened by their quiet competence. I didn't miss the coded feedback, the way collaborative started meaning obedient, and how growth opportunity was usually code for "we're not giving you a raise, but here's more work." I didn't miss being told I should own the room by people who'd never once asked how I built trust outside of one. There's a kind of quiet relief that comes when you realize the system wasn't rejecting you, it was just never made for someone who leads with steadiness instead of spectacle. One afternoon, a former teammate, Sarah, reached out. She'd been one of the last people I'd trained before leaving. She said, "I'm thinking of leaving too." They brought in another culture lead, and now we're tracking smiles during meetings. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "What are you building outside of them?" There was a pause. Then she said, "I don't know. I haven't thought about that." That sentence hit me harder than it should have, because that was me too for years. I had been so busy proving I belonged in their house, I forgot I could build my own, not with glossy decks or founding rounds, just with integrity, with patience, with real work. A few weeks later, Sarah joined us part-time, then full. She wasn't flashy either, just sharp, clear, steady. The kind of person they never promoted but always depended on until they didn't. I didn't need a team, but I wanted one again, not for hierarchy, but for momentum. Real people, not job titles, not avatars on a company org chart that rotated every quarter. One night, Amanda asked if I'd ever go back. I knew what she meant. Back as in corporate. Back as in fighting for a seat that could be taken from under you with a single phrase. I thought about it, not quickly. I let the question sit. Eventually I said maybe, but only if the room has windows and if I get to keep my voice. She nodded like she already knew that answer lived in me long before I said it out loud. The next time I heard from Amy was through a forwarded email. It was sent to my personal inbox by someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, Jenna from finance. We'd only ever exchanged a handful of emails, mostly about budgets and head counts. But in the body of her message, she wrote, "Thought you'd want to see this. P.S. They're falling apart without you. Quietly, but definitely." Attached was a thread. Internal notes from a critical leadership sync full of panic over missed KPIs. An analytics platform no one could decipher, and a list of open roles they couldn't fill because people had stopped applying. There in black and white was the phrase team, still referencing legacy processes from DK's documentation. It made me pause, not because I was flattered, but because they were still using the frameworks I'd built, the ones they'd said were not strategic enough. And now, without me, they were scrambling to replicate the clarity they'd dismissed. I didn't respond to Jenna, not because I didn't appreciate it, I did. Quietly, with a small nod to my screen, but I had nothing I needed to say anymore. No part of me wanted to re-enter that orbit. That kind of power, the power of being missed without having to announce it, is strange. It doesn't puff you up. It empties you out, actually. It reminds you how much of yourself you gave away without knowing. There's no parade for that realization, no mic drop. Just a silent moment at your desk, realizing you're still shaping rooms you no longer sit in. Later that week, I got a message from Nate. No subject line. Just would love to catch up. I've been thinking about what happened. I didn't reply, because by then I wasn't thinking about what happened. I was thinking about what I was building, and who I was becoming now that I no longer needed someone else's approval to validate it. The company tried again 2 months later, this time officially. A recruiter sent a formal request. "We're currently restructuring and exploring strategic leadership talent for the next growth phase. Are you open to discussing a return?" I stared at the message for a while. I thought about all the times I'd been told I wasn't a fit, that I wasn't scalable, that I didn't command the room. And now here they were, looking for a command they could trust. I didn't write back. Instead, I took my son to the park that afternoon. He wanted to show me how far he could throw his baseball now. Said he'd been practicing. We played catch until the lights started shifting. He asked me if I'd ever lost anything important. I said yes. He asked if I got it back. I told him no. But you seem okay now, he said. I am. He nodded like that made perfect sense and threw the ball again. I think that was the moment I realized I'd won not over them, but over the version of myself that used to beg to be seen. Autumn came slow that year. The leaves in our neighborhood turned late like they were still deciding whether to let go. And I understood that feeling of clinging, of waiting for a sign that it's finally time to fall. But when it happened all at once. The air shifted, the light changed, and suddenly it was October and everything looked new again. That's when I started speaking at smaller tech meetups, not to network, not to chase clients, but to share what we were learning. Real things, quiet things, like how to build team trust without surveillance, how to document processes in a way that respected human time, how to lead without needing to be called a leader. One night after a talk on asynchronous culture and burnout prevention, a woman in the audience came up and said, "You don't sound like a founder." I smiled. That's probably why I'm still sane. She laughed, but I meant it. Somewhere along the way, the word leadership got twisted. It became synonymous with volume dominance disruption. But leadership to me had always looked more like patience, like consistency, like being the one person in the room who doesn't flinch when everything tilts. After the talk, I got a text from Eric. "We just signed the third client this week. You're the reason they said yes." I didn't need him to say it, but it felt good to read. Amanda and I celebrated that Friday. Nothing fancy, just takeout and music low enough to hear the silence between songs. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You're not watching your phone anymore." I hadn't noticed, but she was right. I used to keep my phone face up on the table during dinner, during movies, during bedtime stories. Part habit, part fear. Fear that I'd miss the email. The one that might fix things or at least explain them. Now I let it go dark, because the things that mattered were happening in the room I was already in. I was leading again, not by title, not by resume bullet, but by presence, by principle. We hired 3 more people that fall. All referrals. All the kind of professionals who didn't need micromanaging or motivational posters, just space, just clarity, and I gave it to them. One of them, Leah, asked me during onboarding, "So what's the growth plan here?" I said, "To build something we're not ashamed of." "That's it." She blinked, then smiled. That's the first honest answer I've gotten to that question. I wanted to say I used to lie when I answered it too. But I didn't. Some truths you hold quiet. That winter, my son's school held a parent career day. Caleb asked if I could come and explain what I do. So I tried. I told them I help build tools that make work feel less like a trap and more like a place where people can think clearly. That leadership isn't about being in charge, it's about taking care of the people who do the work. They didn't fully understand. But Caleb beamed. Said my dad helps grown-ups not feel bad at work. And honestly, that might be the best summary of what I do. Better than any resume line I ever wrote. One morning in late January, almost exactly a year since they let me go, I got another email. It was from a junior associate at my old company. Someone I didn't know, someone new. He'd just been promoted and was asking if I'd be open to a coffee chat. The message was polite, deferential even. He'd read an article I wrote on ethical roadmap design and said it spoke to a part of leadership he didn't know how to name yet. That line stopped me. I reread it twice. A part of leadership he didn't know how to name yet. That's what was missing in those meetings, in those hollow performance reviews, in the not a culture fit emails. It wasn't that I wasn't leadership material, it was that they couldn't recognize leadership that didn't look like them, that didn't walk in loud, that didn't interrupt to prove a point, that didn't wear charisma like armor. I didn't respond right away. I thought about that young guy, maybe 26, still figuring it out, probably being told the same things I'd been told at 36. Maybe being measured against a standard no one ever questioned because it had been dressed up in enough slide decks and best practices to feel permanent. But it wasn't permanent. I was proof of that. I wrote back a few days later. We set up a call. He asked questions, I answered them. I didn't talk about the past. I didn't name names. I just told the truth that leadership isn't a promotion, it's a pattern. You lead by showing up the same way on slow days as you do on crisis ones. You lead by listening longer than you speak. You lead when no one is watching, and especially when they are. He thanked me. Said he'd been questioning himself lately, said he felt behind. I told him something I wish someone had told me at his age. If the system doesn't recognize you, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It might just mean you're early. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he exhaled, and I knew he understood. After the call, I sat at my desk and looked out the window. Amanda had just come back from a run. Caleb was in the driveway trying to build something with sticks and string. The house was quiet, but full, and I realized something. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had underestimated the kind of leadership that doesn't need credit, the kind that doesn't ask for center stage, the kind that doesn't retaliate when erased, the kind that rebuilds, quietly, completely. The calls started coming more often after that. Not job offers, conversations, quiet messages from people still inside that system. Some I knew, some I didn't. A few were just voices I remembered from echoey Zoom calls, now reaching out under the subject line, "Off the record." They weren't dramatic. No scandal, no whistleblowing, just fatigue. Quiet, worn-down fatigue. One guy, Ethan, wrote, "I haven't slept a full night in months. I keep refreshing dashboards like it'll change the way they see me." Another, "Is it normal to feel invisible unless something goes wrong?" And the one that stayed with me, they keep saying, "Act like an owner." But I'm not sure they'd notice if I left tomorrow. I didn't have solutions. But I listened. And that, it turns out, was more than they were getting from the people above them. I started meeting with some of them once a month, not as a consultant, not as a coach, just as someone who'd made it out and could still remember what it felt like to stay too long. I called it the quiet table. No LinkedIn tags, no retweets, just a place to talk about what work should feel like and what it absolutely shouldn't steal from you. The people who came were all good fits on paper, mid-level, reliable, strategic, but behind the screen they were exhausted. From translating ambiguity, from justifying worth, from carrying cultures that paid lip service to empathy while silently punishing anything that looked like care. One woman, Naomi, told me she'd led 5 projects to success, trained her own manager twice, and still wasn't getting eye contact in quarterly reviews. She said it without anger, just fact. I asked her what she wanted. She said, "I want to stop auditioning for people who already decided what I'm not." I told her she just wrote the next version of my story in one sentence. These people, these so-called non-leaders, they were holding teams together while someone else got the keynote. They were anchoring products in reality while someone else promised blue sky features that would never ship. They weren't broken. They were just breaking under the weight of being unrecognized for too long. And yet they still showed up, still replied to emails at 6 a.m., still picked up drop tasks, still protected interns from bad strategy, still cared. That was the most dangerous kind of strength, I realized, the kind they couldn't control, so they chose not to see it. And me, I had seen enough. I wasn't angry anymore, I wasn't sad, I was awake. I started sketching something new, not another startup, not another career move, something quieter. A framework, maybe. A blueprint for leadership that didn't require shouting, that didn't get sold in TED Talks or brand manuals. Just a way of being that preserved people. Because that's what was missing: preservation, of dignity, of capacity, of soul. In their world, everything was extractive. In mine, I wanted things to grow. It's been 1.5 years now. Sometimes when the house is still, when Amanda's asleep, when Caleb's breathing softly down the hall, I sit by the window with a cup of tea and let the silence stretch out. I think about the meeting, the one that lasted 7 minutes and took 11 years to set up. I think about the phrase they used, "You're not leadership material." It doesn't sting anymore. Not because I proved them wrong, because I stopped needing to. They couldn't see me. But I did, eventually, and I think that's what matters most in the end, not who gives you the title, but whether you recognize your own reflection when the lights go out. There's no finish line to that kind of growth, just moments. Quiet ones. A son's question about failure. A teammate's sigh of relief when you say, "It's okay, we'll figure it out." An inbox that no longer controls your self-worth. These are the things I hold now. These are the things I lead with. I don't tell this story for attention. I tell it so the next man sitting in a dark room after a Zoom call like mine doesn't think he's the only one. If they said the same thing to you, if they told you you're not leadership material, I hope you hear this clearly. Maybe they just never learned how to see it when it wasn't loud. And maybe leadership isn't about being seen by them. Maybe it's about staying whole long enough to lead yourself out. That's all I've done. That's all I'll keep doing, and that's enough. David Kent.